There's that famous expression, isn't there? Necessity is the mother of invention. But although we'd probably all agree that the regulation of payments is important, necessary in fact, I'm not sure that everyone would agree that regulation stimulates innovation. So to put that question another way, do regulations kill or kindle payments innovation? Let's explore that in this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Welcome to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline, bringing you the latest innovations, trends and predictions about the future of payments.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Navigating Digital Payments. I'm David Daly. I look after the Discovery Hub here at Worldline, and I'm delighted to be joined today by two people to discuss this topic of innovation in payments. We have Sylvie Calsacy, who is the Head of Public and Regulatory Affairs at Worldline, and I must say I don't know anyone who understands the regulatory landscape in payments, and particularly in European payments, better than Sylvie. So Sylvie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. I'm very happy to be here.
Great to have you. And then covering the innovation side, we have Jonathan Sauer, who is an innovation manager for the Benelux region for the Worldline Financial Services business and very experienced in all topics related to innovation. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, David. It's fantastic to be here today.
Really pleased you could join us too. So later, I'd really like to hear from both of you your view, your answer to this question of whether regulations kill or kindle innovation. But first, I thought it would be good to kind of divide the topic down into two areas. So first, I'll come to you, Jonathan, on what leads to and what drives innovation more generally, and then come to you, Sylvie, to understand more what some of the most important regulatory changes in payments have been, and also which ones you're seeing on the horizon. And then we'll come back to this key question. So Jonathan, I start with you, and maybe we go right back to the kind of basics. And as an expert in innovation, can you define in a very simple, easy to understand way what we even mean by innovation?
Yes, sure, David. So innovation is doing something in a new way. So it could be in a new way for you or for you as a company, or it could be new in an industry. It can be incremental, improving a product or service, or it can be more disruptive. I think that's the easiest way to explain innovation.
And I think that's a really useful point to make, that it's about doing something new for you, for the company, or as an individual. It's not necessarily something that's never been tried before in the whole world. And as you say, it can sometimes be incremental, sometimes disruptive. So coming back a bit more specifically to payments and innovation in payments, what do you think is stimulating or driving innovation in our industry?
Yes, so I think innovation is driven mostly in the financial services industry. It's mostly about competition and advances in technology. And so competition is driving you to take care of customers in a new way, provide new user experiences, and of course be the first to market to provide such an experience. And of course, this also goes for payments. So you see that if you look at banks, for example, they start adding a lot of new features to their apps. Which allow you, for example, to save smarter or to have more enriched transaction information. And these kind of uses you see it's driven mainly by competition being the first. And then technology is also important. Our smartphones allow us to have a rich number of user experiences on our phones.
It's firstly interesting that you say that about competition driving innovation, but also that some of the examples you mentioned there are about the user experience, because so often on this podcast we've found that many things in payments all come back to the user experience. So either providing something more frictionless or more intuitive, or providing something that gives some added value or benefit for the end user. And so kind of relating to that then, Jonathan, what do you think have been some of the most significant or important innovations that we've seen in payments in recent times?
So I think it's related to the smartphone, because a lot of experiences can be provided through a smartphone. So I think nowadays it's been it's quite normal to take out your phone and make a payment. But you can do so much more with a smartphone. It enables more rich user experiences where you can capture extra information. You could go omni-channel, go buy something online, then pick it up in a store. And so smartphones allows for new kind of experiences, but also fully digital experiences. If you look at open banking, we can now aggregate accounts of different banks within a single app. May this be your own bank, may this be in another bank app.
It's also interesting there, isn't it, that when I think of just online banking, so not even mobile banking, that is something that was really in its infancy, say 15 years ago. Very few people were using that. Going to a branch was still the main way that people accessed their banking services. And now it's really all online banking, but perhaps even more so, it's mobile banking. And I think the big difference there is that most people always have their phone with them. So it wouldn't be so convenient, if you're out at the shops and you wanted to check your account balance. If you had to drive home and log onto your PC in your study to check it, you wouldn't do it. But now you can just open your app. In my case, it's facial recognition. Don't even have to log in or have any kind of credentials, and I could check my balance in the matter of a few seconds. So as you say, huge change really by the rise of mobile and the technology associated with that. So now let's maybe switch to the regulatory side. And Sylvie, if I can bring you in here, what would you say, looking back at payments, has been sort of the most significant regulatory changes that we've seen there?
So thank you, David. And yes, about regulation, so I propose to zoom on the Europe area, because as you can imagine, we have the same development in the rest of the world. So clearly, I think that in Europe, the kickoff for this new regulatory framework for payments began with the launch of Euro, clearly. At the beginning of 20,000, we could see new regulations with the SEPA regulation, for instance, or cross-border regulation. So now such a text are just the basic layer. And recently, so now in 2015, the European Parliament voted the famous PSD2. So the PSD2 is a key building block in this regulation ecosystem. This year was also a significant year for payments with Digital Market Act, Digital Service Act, with MiCA also, a text that will regulate the ecosystem for stablecoin or other new crypto assets. GDPR also, for me, is a key element, and because without trust, it's impossible to deploy a digital device or invisible payments, as we say now. You and me, as citizens, we need trust, and GDPR clearly is essential in our ecosystem. Other texts, like Settlement Finality Directive, was also a new element regarding the clearing mechanism. So I think that in Europe, we have a very strong culture around regulation for payments, and it can explain that I think we can say we are front runner on this topic, and next year will be also a fantastic year for new text, clearly.
I was going to say, and maybe you can come on to that, Sylvie. So, as you say, a kind of progressive set of regulations driven particularly by the adoption of the euro. What do you see coming next? What's on the horizon for regulations in payments?
I think that at minimum today we can identify 3 pillars regarding regulation in payments. The first one will be to continue and to to grow up regarding the PSD, the famous one. So we are working on the PSD3, as you know. And I will consolidate in this package the proposal in progress on instant payment. For me, it's the same mindset. The new one, very important, will concern artificial intelligence, because in payments we are using more and more algorithms, for instance, for fraud detection, but also tomorrow for the IoT, the famous Internet of Things. So today it's possible to pay with or in your cars, with your watch, glasses. So more and more devices are available for you and me to pay. And how to identify the liability shift, it will be essential. And the third pillar will concern the new ecosystem in preparation on digital currencies issued by central bank. So we will need a framework, and we are working on it. At minimum in Europe, we expect for the mid of next year a new regulatory framework. We could see that in England this week a new package has been launched. So clearly, everywhere over the world, initiatives are in progress on this aspect. So 3 pillars, a new step for the PSD2, PSD3, algorithm, IoT, and the last one around crypto assets and digital euro or digital currencies, clearly.
And I think one of the interesting things as you talk about the regulatory landscape, Sylvie, is that there are, let's say, the direct payment regulations, things like PSD2, PSD3, which is obviously connected with payments, but then also what I'd call maybe more the indirect ones, as you say, AI regulation. This is not specific to the payments landscape, but because AI is now an important part of how payments are processed, how they're authorized, it actually is something that...
Completely right, David. And just to illustrate, for instance, the new package regarding anti-money laundering. I think that on this aspect, it's important for the payment industry to know what are our duties as processor, who is responsible to detect if we are facing with anti-money laundering temptation or something like that, and also for the onboarding of your customer, what to do in the KYC before processing payments. So you are fully right. We can see two trends: direct regulation with payments in the title, like PSD, and the second set of rules about the global ecosystem, so anti-money laundering, with the KYC, the IoT with algorithm, and so on and so forth.
And the other thing I maybe just wanted to ask you a bit about, Sylvie, is specifically PSD3 and whether you have a view yet on what some of the important changes are going to be there.
So I don't have any ball of crystal, but maybe we can say that there will be one adaptation regarding the authentication and the exemption management. And clearly, we need clarification and adaptation. Second, regarding the access to account. In PSD2, we were just focusing on payments account. And the idea of the regulators is tomorrow to manage access to financial accounts. It will be your insurance account, it will be your savings account, it will be your pension account. So all the accounts in which we can identify financial assets. Okay? And on this aspect, we will talk tomorrow about open finance. Today, we're talking about open banking. So I focus on my bank account, payments account. And tomorrow, I will focus on open finance, so larger scope. And the third one will concern the payments of tomorrow. So how to integrate biometrics, how to integrate machine learning. So this aspect, we in Worldline, we talk about invisible payment. Jonathan, under your control, we know that nothing is invisible. There will be systematically a code 01 or something like that. So nothing is invisible. But for the citizen, potentially it could be invisible. So how to initiate this innovation and to prepare the landscape for tomorrow. And we can see today the European Commission, at minimum, takes care systematically in the appendix of the text or at the beginning to mention this text will encourage innovation. It's essential for the regulator to avoid any limitation in innovation due to regulation.
And that maybe brings us nicely on to this question of how regulations influence innovation. But before I come on to that, I do just want to remind people that if you want to get in touch with us, suggest topics for future episodes, give us any feedback, then you can reach us by emailing ndp-podcast@worldline.com. And also a reminder, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and do leave us a rating and a review. So coming back to this question then of innovation and regulations, perhaps we start with the sort of the negative view. So Sylvie, if I can come to you, out of the regulations you were describing, are there any that you think could or might limit innovation? And if so, do you think the benefits of that regulation outweighs the fact that it might limit innovation?
Clearly, you and me, we know that complexity will stop innovation. So if the text is too complex to implement, investors or providers will need time to implement, to understand. And typically with the PSD2, all the experts needed at minimum 3-5 years to understand. This year we received the latest answers to questions raised 5 years ago, just to illustrate how complex it was. Second element, fragmentation. In Europe, we have two possibilities. It could be a directive or a regulation. If it is a directive, it will give the direction to the member state. So it means we will have 27 translations for the same text. Result, you will have a fragmented implementation.
So it's really interesting, Sylvie, that you mentioned those aspects that could potentially limit innovation. But in your view, are there also aspects of regulations that can have a positive impact on innovation?
Yes, there are positive impacts, such as a minimum regulation make possible a level playing field between actors, as introduced by the Digital Market Act, clearly. And another point will be the possibility to promote new actors, example, TPPs with the PSD2. Same rules, same risk. It's possible now also for small companies like fintech startups to propose the same services as the big players. Okay, and another point would be the possibility for consumers to know who is responsible. What about the liability shift? And if you know, okay, if I use this device, if I use this platform, at minimum, I know that I will be protected. Okay, there will be rules. So, same level playing fields, access to different actors, not only the incumbents. And the third point would be protection and liability shift management now is clearer.
Thank you, Sylvie. And maybe, Jonathan, I could also bring you on this kind of positive aspects of regulations for innovation. Do you have examples of some interesting innovations that have been stimulated by regulations or that might be stimulated by regulations in the future?
I think I will hook on to the liability, because liability, it also creates clarity. And so, which means, for example, in open banking in particular, where banks have to open up and give access to their accounts, their payment accounts at first, and then a later stage also the financial accounts, which creates clarity for other players to access this information. This was information previously owned just by banks, and some banks would leverage this and provide additional services on top. But this was quite limited. Now what we see is, because of these new regulations, banks are forced to open up and provide this information and services externally for free. So which kind of forces banks to innovate, internally provide new kind of user experiences and provide more value add. On the other hand, it opens up a field where other players can play. So what we've seen is fintechs coming on into the market that suddenly have a certainty that they have access to information of banks, of accounts of people, and can provide services on top of that. So first, I think it was more about account aggregation. So putting different bank accounts into one app and having an overview and manage your cash between these accounts. But there is also one important part. It's about account information. It's about the transactions that you're doing, and also the payment initiation service. This is provoking a payment in the app. So this allows for external apps to integrate payments into their app. So it can be a merchant that has sufficient user base that can then integrate your account, can provoke a payment, and provide a rich user experience in this way. So I think if this regulation wouldn't exist, then it would be very hard for this merchant to provide such a service. So it's the positive side of regulation. It provides certainty to operate in this new kind of market. It also creates more competition for banks, and which is healthy. It's a bit scary in the beginning, I think, because if you looked at Need 5 years ago when PSD2 was introduced, we were all scrambling. What is happening? What is this going to do to us? We have to give away the data for free and even provide payment services for free. This has now, of course, cleared up. It didn't provoke such a radical change into the market, but we see slowly the effects now.
And I think what's really interesting hearing both your answers is that, a little bit like Sylvie, we talked earlier about direct payments regulation and then regulation that indirectly affects it. You could almost say the same about innovation, because Jonathan, right at the start, you talked about competition stimulates innovation. So you have something like the Digital Markets Act, or even just the idea of a level playing field, and you realise that stimulates competition, and competition in turn leads to innovation. And then you have more direct kind of aspects of, say, PSD2, PSD3, where it's kind of more at a technical level, almost enabling companies to do things that they just couldn't do before, because the data wasn't made available for free, and wasn't made available in an accessible format. So it's quite interesting to hear that. So now I do want to put you both completely on the spot and ask you directly this question that we started with. So perhaps, Sylvie, I come to you first. Do regulations kill or kindle innovation?
Kindle.
That's a very nice, direct, single word answer. So thank you for that, Sylvie. And Jonathan, what's your view?
It definitely kindles innovation.
And also perhaps an unexpectedly direct and straightforward answer to that question then from you as well, Jonathan. So I think it was a really interesting discussion. It was nice to think about what we mean by innovation, that it's not always some huge, new, big, sudden disruption, but it can be more incremental. It was fascinating actually to think about the historical context of regulation and the timeline that's involved. And also, Sylvie, when you mentioned that PSD2 has kind of taken sort of 5 years, I suppose, to get real traction, I also think that shows that sometimes regulation gives you a glimpse of the future, because what's happening in regulations now, the real big changes from that won't happen next year. They'll happen in 3, 4, 5 years' time. So they do give you this kind of window onto what might happen in the future of payments and finance more generally. And then I think it was also interesting just to discuss both the negative side, as you said, the complexity, the fragmentation, but also the way that innovation can be stimulated by regulations, and also what you mentioned about enabling users to trust new services. Again, I see this in the UK that, there are all sorts of banking services now provided, and if they weren't regulated by the FCA and you didn't know that they came with certain guarantees, you wouldn't feel comfortable using them. And of course that means the same traditional incumbents would be the only people that people would trust, and therefore you have less competition, and with less competition you have less innovation. So it's another interesting facet, I think, of how regulations can kindle innovation. So really appreciate both of you joining the podcast for this very interesting discussion. So thank you so much, Sylvie.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jonathan. And happy to listen.
And thank you, Jonathan, as well, for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having us, David. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you guys.
And that just leaves me to thank you, our dear listeners, for joining us once again for this episode as we navigated digital payments.
Thank you for listening to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline. Join us next time to learn more about the latest innovations, trends, and predictions for the future of payments.